The morning air carried the familiar scent of hay and leather, but something felt different as I walked toward the main barn. Dad's boots had already left their mark in the dirt path. Deep impressions, heading toward town instead of the pastures. I knew where he was going. The annual cattle auction started today, and for the first time in 15 years, I wouldn't be riding alongside him in the old Ford. "You don't belong around real stock anymore." His words from last night still echoed in my mind. The disappointment in his voice had cut deeper than any physical wound. I'd spent my entire life on this ranch, learning every inch of the land, understanding each animal's temperament, but apparently none of that mattered now. The barn stood empty, except for the few head we weren't selling. Their gentle lowing seemed to mock my isolation. I ran my hand along the weathered wooden rails, remembering countless mornings when Dad and I would walk these same pens together, discussing which animals were ready for market, which ones showed the best bloodlines. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors and fellow ranchers, all asking if I'd see them at the auction. Each notification felt like salt in an open wound. How could I explain that my own father didn't think I was worthy of attending the most important event in our community's calendar? The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the empty corral. Somewhere in town, the auction was beginning without me. The thought of missing it felt like losing a piece of my identity, but maybe this was the push I needed to forge my own path. I found myself walking the fence line, checking for breaks that didn't exist, just to keep my hands busy. Every step stirred up memories of better times. The year I was 12 and helped Dad bid on our prize bull. The spring when I spotted the perfect breeding cow that would later produce our best calves. The countless hours we'd spent discussing bloodlines, market trends, and the future of the ranch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very knowledge Dad had taught me was now apparently insufficient in his eyes. I'd made one mistake, one error in judgment about a sick calf 6 months ago, and suddenly everything I'd learned meant nothing. The animal had recovered, but Dad's trust in me seemed permanently damaged. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. I envied its freedom, its ability to soar above the petty concerns of humans below. From its perspective, our family drama probably seemed insignificant against the vast expanse of prairie and sky. The mailbox at the end of our drive bore the family name in faded letters, 3 generations of ranchers who'd worked this land. Would I be the last? The thought had never seriously crossed my mind until today. Maybe there were other ways to honor the family legacy, ways that didn't require my father's approval. I kicked at a clump of dried grass, sending seeds scattering in the wind. Like those seeds, perhaps it was time for me to find new ground to grow in. By noon, the phone calls started. First it was Uncle Jim wondering where I was. His voice carried genuine concern, mixed with confusion. We'd planned to meet at the auction, to catch up over coffee while the early lots were being shown. "Your dad's here, but he's not saying much about why you're not." I could hear the background noise of the auction, the auctioneer's rapid-fire chatter, the lowing of cattle, the conversations of buyers and sellers. It was a world I'd known my entire life, suddenly made foreign by my absence. Sarah Martinez called next. She managed one of the larger spreads 3 counties over and had always been a family friend. Her tone was more direct. "Listen, honey, I don't know what's going on between you and your dad, but you've got more knowledge about cattle than half the people here. If you want to start your own operation, you know I've got land I could lease." Her offer surprised me. I'd always assumed my future was tied to the family ranch, but maybe there were other possibilities I hadn't considered. The idea of independence both thrilled and terrified me. The last call was from Tom Bradley, an old-timer who'd known my grandfather. His words were few but carried weight. "Sometimes the apple needs to fall farther from the tree to really grow, kid. Your grandpa would understand." That evening, as the auction wound down, I sat on the porch watching the dust settle on the drive. Dad would be home soon, probably counting his earnings and planning next year's breeding program. I wondered if he'd even mention my absence. Dad's headlights cut through the twilight as his truck pulled into the drive. I stayed on the porch, listening to the familiar sounds of his evening routine. The truck door slamming, his boots on the gravel, the jingle of keys. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, and for a moment I thought he might say something. Instead, he simply nodded and walked inside. The screen door closed with its usual creak, leaving me alone with the night sounds of the ranch. Later, through the kitchen window, I could see him at the table sorting through papers and checks. The auction had gone well, apparently. Good for him, good for the ranch. The practical side of me was glad. We needed the money for winter feed and fence repairs. The emotional side felt like I was watching my life through glass. I'd spent the day thinking about Sarah's offer, about Uncle Jim's concern, about Tom Bradley's wisdom. Each conversation had planted seeds of possibility in my mind. Maybe Dad was right about one thing. Maybe I didn't belong around real stock anymore. Maybe I belonged somewhere bigger. The stars appeared one by one, the same constellations I'd learned to read as a child. Polaris, the North Star, steady and unchanging. Cassiopeia, spreading across the northern sky. They'd guided generations of travelers to new destinations. Perhaps it was time for them to guide me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Offer stands. Come see the land when you're ready. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'll call you tomorrow. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of cattle settling in for the night, but for the first time I dreamed of different pastures. The Martinez Ranch sat in a valley 30 miles south, where the grass grew thicker and the water ran clearer. Sarah met me at the gate, her weathered face creased with a welcoming smile. She'd built her operation from nothing 20 years ago after her husband passed, and now ran one of the most successful breeding programs in the state. Land doesn't care about family politics, she said as we walked the fence line. It just responds to good stewardship. The pastures were beautiful, rolling hills dotted with mature cottonwoods, a creek running through the center, and grass that looked like it had never seen overgrazing. 500 acres that could easily support a modest herd, with room to grow. Why me? I asked. You could lease this to anyone. She stopped and looked at me directly. Because I've watched you at auctions since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I've seen how you evaluate stock, how you treat animals, how you understand the land. Your father might not see it right now, but you've got the makings of a fine rancher. We spent the afternoon discussing terms, walking boundaries, and talking about possibilities. The lease was fair, the land was perfect, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something resembling hope. Driving home, I practiced the conversation I'd have with Dad. How do you tell your father that you're ready to leave everything you've ever known? How do you explain that sometimes love means letting go? The family ranch looked smaller somehow as I pulled into the drive. Maybe it was just perspective, or maybe I was finally seeing it through adult eyes. Dad was mending a bridle in the barn when I found him. His hands worked the leather with practiced skill, fingers that had done this same task thousands of times. I watched him for a moment, remembering all the times he taught me similar skills. Dad, we need to talk. He didn't look up, but his hands paused. About what? About my future. About the ranch. About why you didn't want me at the auction. Finally, he set down the bridle and faced me. His eyes held a mixture of stubbornness and something that might have been regret. You made a mistake with that calf, cost us money. One mistake in 15 years, Dad. One. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at something beyond my shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Maybe it wasn't about the calf. The admission hung between us like morning mist. I waited, sensing there was more. Your mother always said you were too smart for this place, said you'd outgrow us eventually. He picked up the bridle again, his fingers working automatically. Maybe I was trying to make that happen before it happened naturally. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd thought he was disappointed in my abilities. Instead, he'd been afraid of losing me to bigger dreams. What if I told you I found some land to lease, that I want to start my own operation? His hands stilled again. I'd say it's about time. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Legal documents for the lease, loan applications at the bank, countless phone calls to suppliers and contractors. Dad helped more than I'd expected, offering advice on everything from fence specifications to feed contracts. Our relationship felt different now. Less father and child, more colleague to colleague. "You'll want to start with bred cows," he said one evening over dinner. "Heifers are cheaper, but you need cash flow." Indeed, I'd already reached the same conclusion, but hearing him say it felt like validation. We spent the evening planning my first herd, discussing bloodlines and market strategies with an ease we hadn't shared in months. Sarah introduced me to her banker, her veterinarian, her feed supplier. Each meeting opened new doors, new relationships that would be crucial to success. The ranching community was tight-knit, but welcoming to those who proved their commitment. "Reputation is everything in this business," she reminded me. "Treat people fair, deliver what you promise, and pay your bills on time. Everything else follows from that." I found myself staying up late, reading market reports and breeding journals, planning and replanning every aspect of the operation. The excitement was intoxicating, but so was the fear. What if I failed? What if Dad was right to doubt my abilities? The bank approved my loan application on a Thursday morning. That afternoon, I signed the lease papers in Sarah's kitchen while she made coffee and offered unsolicited but welcome advice about cash flow management. Driving home with the signed contracts in my passenger seat, I felt like I was carrying my entire future in a manila folder. The cattle sale was smaller than our county's big auction, but the quality was good. I arrived early, walking the pens and evaluating the stock with newfound purpose. These wouldn't be my father's cattle or family cattle. They would be mine, sink or swim. I'd studied the catalogue for days, identifying potential purchases and setting strict limits on what I could afford to bid. 20 bred cows to start with, all due to calve in spring. A modest beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The auctioneer recognized me as I registered for a bidder number. "Heard you're starting your own place. Good for you, son." Word traveled fast in small communities. By the time the sale started, several people had offered congratulations and advice. Tom Bradley even sought me out during the break. "Your granddad started with less than 20 head too. Look what he built." The bidding was competitive but fair. I stayed disciplined, walking away from cattle that went above my limits, even when my heart wanted to keep bidding. By the end of the day, I'd bought 18 bred cows, 2 fewer than planned, but within budget. Loading them into the borrowed trailer, I felt a mixture of pride and terror. These animals represented everything I'd learned, everything I hoped to become. They were my responsibility now, completely and utterly. The drive to the Martinez Ranch was 30 of the longest miles of my life. Behind me, my future moved softly in the trailer. The cattle adapted to their new home faster than I did. Within days, they'd established grazing patterns and social hierarchies, turning Sarah's unused pasture into a working ranch. I, on the other hand, found myself second-guessing every decision. Was the mineral supplement right for this soil? Should I move them to the south pasture? Were they getting enough protein? The questions multiplied faster than I could find answers. Paralysis by analysis. Sarah called it, when she found me standing in the pasture one morning, notepad in hand, trying to calculate optimal stocking rates for the third time. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts. Her words reminded me of something Dad used to say: cattle are pretty good at being cattle if you don't overthink it. I established routines, morning checks, afternoon counts, evening walks around the fence line. The cattle began to recognize my truck, gathering near the gate when I arrived, anticipating the cubes of feed I'd scatter to check their condition. 3 of the cows were showing signs of approaching calving. I started checking them twice daily, looking for the subtle signs Dad had taught me to recognize. The first birth would be a milestone, proof that this dream could become reality. My phone rang less frequently now. Dad still called every few days, ostensibly to ask about feed prices or weather, but really to check on my progress. His questions had shifted from skeptical to genuinely interested. "How are they settling in?" he asked during one evening call. "Better than I am," I admitted, and heard him chuckle. "That's normal. The land will teach you what you need to know." The cow went into labor just after midnight on a cold February morning. I'd been checking her every few hours, sleeping fitfully in the truck between visits. When I found her lying down, sides heaving, I knew it was time. Everything Dad had taught me about difficult births came flooding back. When to intervene, when to wait, how to assist without causing harm. The cow labored for 2 hours before I finally saw hooves emerging. I held my breath, counting legs, praying for a normal presentation. The calf slipped into the world just as the eastern sky began to lighten. A heifer, black with a white face, breathing strongly and trying to stand within minutes. The cow was on her feet immediately, licking and talking to her baby with the low, rumbling sounds that seemed to translate to "You're safe now." I sat in the truck, watching this miracle I'd witnessed hundreds of times, but never quite like this. This was my cow, my calf, my responsibility and my success. The emotion surprised me with its intensity. By sunrise, the calf was nursing and the cow was grazing peacefully nearby. I called Dad, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Black heifer, about 60 pounds, nursing well. Good cow." "Excellent cow. She knew exactly what to do." There was pride in his voice when he said, "That's how it's supposed to work." Over the next 3 weeks, 17 more calves arrived, all healthy, all thriving. My little herd had nearly doubled, and every morning check felt like Christmas morning. Spring brought new challenges and new successes. Grass growth was excellent, the calves were gaining weight rapidly, and I'd established relationships with local hay producers and a veterinarian who made house calls. The operation was beginning to feel real, sustainable. I started attending the monthly Cattlemen's Association meetings, not as my father's son, but as a rancher in my own right. The conversations were different now. People asked for my opinion on market trends, included me in discussions about cooperative purchasing agreements. "You're fitting in well," Sarah observed one evening as we checked my cattle together. "People are starting to see you as Jake the rancher, not just Jake's kid." The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. For my entire life, my identity had been tied to the family ranch, to being my father's son. Building something independent felt like discovering who I really was. Dad visited one Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to look at a bull I was considering purchasing. He walked through the herd with an appraising eye, running his hands over cattle, checking udders and feet with practiced efficiency. "Good stock," he said finally. "You got an eye for quality." Coming from him, the compliment meant everything. We spent the afternoon talking about breeding decisions, feed strategies, and long-term plans. For the first time, he seemed to see me as a peer rather than a student. "Your mother would be proud," he said as he prepared to leave. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. Mum had died when I was 16, before she could see what I might become. But somehow I thought she would understand this journey, this need to prove myself on my own terms. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late summer. The voice on the other end was professional but friendly, someone from the State Cattlemen's Association. "We're looking for young ranchers to feature in our newsletter. Your operation has caught some attention. Would you be interested in an interview?" The interview took place in my pasture, with my cattle as backdrop. The reporter asked about challenges, successes, and future plans. I found myself talking about the land, about the satisfaction of building something from scratch, about the lessons I'd learned in my first year of independence. "What's the most important thing your father taught you?" she asked near the end. I thought for a moment, watching my cattle graze peacefully in the afternoon sun. That the land doesn't care about your ego. It responds to respect and hard work, regardless of whose name is on the deed. The article appeared 6 weeks later with a photo of me leaning against a fence post, my cattle scattered across green pasture behind me. The headline read, "New Generation, Same Values. Young Rancher Builds Success on Time-Tested Principles." Dad called that evening. Saw the article, good picture. "Thanks. The part about respect and hard work. That's something your grandfather used to say." I remember. He said it to me once when I was about 12. Tea. We talked for an hour that night, sharing memories of the man who'd started our family's ranching tradition. It felt like coming full circle, honoring the past while embracing the future. 1 year after being excluded from the cattle auction that had seemed so important, I found myself preparing for my first sale as an independent rancher. My calves had grown into fine yearlings, and several buyers had already expressed interest. The morning of the auction, I loaded my cattle into the same trailers I'd helped Dad use for years. But this time, the destination was different, the purpose was mine alone, and the outcome would determine whether this dream had legs for the long term. Dad appeared as I was checking the trailer one final time. He handed me a thermos of coffee and a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" "Your grandfather's notes from his first cattle sale. Thought you might like to have them." The paper was yellowed and brittle, covered with penciled calculations and observations. At the bottom, in my grandfather's careful handwriting, "A man's worth isn't measured by what he inherits, but by what he builds." At the auction, my cattle sold well, not the highest prices of the day, but respectable for a first-year operation. More importantly, several buyers asked about purchasing directly from me in the future. I was building the relationships that would sustain this business for years to come. As I watched the last of my calves go through the ring, I felt a deep sense of completion. The scared young man who'd been excluded from last year's auction was gone, replaced by someone who belonged in this world on his own terms. Dad appeared beside me as the final lots were being sold. "Good day. Very good day. Your mother always said you'd find your own way." She was right. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching other ranchers conduct their business, planning their futures. The annual cycle of birth, growth, and sale would continue, and I was part of it now, not as someone's son, but as myself. Later, driving home with empty trailers and full pockets, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes the path forward requires leaving everything familiar behind. Sometimes love means disappointing the people you care about most. Sometimes the only way to prove you belong is to build your own place to belong. The lights were on in the house when I pulled into the Martinez ranch. Sarah was probably making dinner, ready to hear about the sale and start planning next year's breeding decisions. Tomorrow, I'd check on my bred cows, repair fence, and continue building this dream one day at a time. The stars were coming out, same constellations I'd learned as a child, but viewed from a different place, through different eyes. Polaris still pointed north, steady and unchanging, but I'd learned that sometimes the most important journeys lead you right back to where you belong, not as you were, but as who you were meant to become.